Would you like to wait? Okay, great. So without further ado, just wanted to let everyone know that at the end we'll welcome questions and have a little talk afterward, but we're going to be recording this session. So we just want to let everybody know that. And so I thank you very much for coming. And my colleague, Brian, here is going to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. This is Frank Richards, president of the Weber Pond Association. We thank him very much for coming and speaking to us today. I'd just like to take a few moments to acknowledge the indigenous peoples that came before European contact, that lived off of alewives and were part of the seasonal alewife run for generations. But here we are speaking to Frank Richards, and he will give us the history of Vassalboro and the alewife runs here historically. So thank you all for joining us today. You are all set, Frank. Thank you so much. Go ahead and take off your mask.
Yep. And is it just Sue and Jim?
There's others there.
Oh, okay.
You just can't see them. Yeah.
Hi, can you all hear me? If you can't hear, please signify, and either Brian or Melora will address it. Our first slide to start the history is a photo of the old Massey Dam. I was present when they broke through and water came free-flowing out of China Lake for the first time in well over 200 years. The site has been rehabbed, and it looks quite nice. Since then, there's been a similar renovation at the Lombard Dam, and fish ladders constructed at Box Mills and the Ladd Dam. And there's a couple of more dams with fish passage projects also underway. It's quite a history as to how this came to be. Vassalboro has gained a fair amount of reputation as being a center of alewife restoration. That wasn't something that I would have imagined 30 years ago. But first, a little bit of introduction about myself, how I became the Forrest Gump of Alewives. 30 years ago, I was at my house, innocently watching television and drinking beer. The phone rings and this voice on the other end says, "You don't know me, but my husband met you out ice fishing. And there's this meeting that we're having that he thinks you might be interested in." We think life is so planned. We think life is linear and rational, but that totally happenstance event eventually led to my becoming the president of the Weber Pond Association. And over a period of time, becoming more and more involved with alewife restoration. As you may recall, the plot of the movie Forrest Gump was Forrest sat on that bench waiting for buses, and people would come and sit beside them, and Forrest would tell them the story of his life. In my case, People come and sit beside me, and I don't get to talk much. They just talk to me about alewives, and that's been going on now since about 2000. One of the early people that came to my attention was the regional biologist for the Department of Marine Resources. I invited him to speak at the annual meeting of the Weber Pond Association. He showed up and gave a good talk. At that point, alewives were just one more thing on my agenda. Afterwards, I went up and talked to him a little, and he told me that he had participated in the Iditarod, which is a famous sled dog race in Alaska from Fairbanks to Nome. And not only that, but he was on the team of the woman who won it, a musher named Susan Butcher. And I thought that was cool. And I told him that I had canoed the Moisey River, which is a very remote river that runs between Labrador and Quebec. And he knew what the Moisey River was. So I was impressed by that too. By way of history, we'll get back to Nate in a minute. By way of history, sea run alewives are a native species that was extirpated by dams in the 1800s. There is historical record that we found in a library in Massachusetts, a historical library in Massachusetts. This goes back to when Maine was part of Massachusetts, and there's lengthy correspondence about getting permission to build dams on the China outlet stream, and a defense about the alewives of there's plenty of other places in Maine where there's a lot of alewives. Initially, alewife restoration was controversial. I'm not entirely sure why. I think people had forgotten that they were a natural part of the ecosystem. Today, they're much less controversial because of the well-received restoration on Weber Pond. Because things went well on Weber, that was a historical key that opened up restorations on several other lakes, and eventually to China Lake with the complex restoration on that stream. It's still occasionally controversial. We got a post on the Weber Pond Association Facebook page a while back complaining that the state was using Weber Pond as a quote unquote a bait tank. I got a laugh out of that one. As time passed, the Maine Department of Marine Resources has become nationally recognized as experts. Very unexpectedly to me, but the alewives have evolved as quite a significant business. They're used for alewife, they're used for lobster bait, and that has, in a short period of time, come to be a multi-million-dollar industry, and it generates that's a lot of money, and that has brought in new players, not just DMR, not just environmental activists, but now there's marine fishery lobster lobbyists showing up at legislative hearings. And as I mentioned earlier, Vassalboro, of all places, has become something of an epicenter in alewife restoration. Now, You see that bald guy in the middle? That's the Iditarod musher, all grown up. Beside him, to his right, is a familiar figure, the governor of Maine, Janet Mills. Behind her is Judy Camuso, who is the Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. And to Nate's left is Pat Kelleher, who is the Commissioner of the Department of Marine Resources. And I can't resist pointing out, but there in the background with the black baseball cap is Forrest Gump himself. This was another type of historical event. It was the first time, as best as we can tell, in all of history, that the governor and the commissioners of IF&W and Marine Resources went to an event together of any kind, much less to visit an alewife fish ladder. They went out for lunch. They had a great time. Here we have the governor scooping up some alewives with the governor and with the commissioner and the commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, looking on and having fun. In back is the colonel of the Marine Patrol. He's security for the day. And between the two of them is a woman named Landis Hudson, who is the executive director of Maine Rivers, which is overseeing the project to restore fish passage to China Lake. Here we have the harvest in action. Each of those crates is worth about $100. It's surprising to me what a market there is. And this is the Weber Pond fish ladder. And it's up there at the top where in the previous pictures, they've been scooping up alewives. That is a deceptive design. It's based on hydrological principles of running water, creating still water underneath. And there's been a lot more engineering and calculations in that than you might think. But basically underneath that white water is a still layer, and the alewives can just scoot up it almost effortlessly. Here's some of the adults below the dam. They look like a big shiner, between 12 and sometimes 16 inches long. The alewives returned to Weber for 2021 just yesterday. I was down at the dam this afternoon, and it's just excellent. The biggest fish come back in the early part of the run. As the run gets later into late May and early June, you get much smaller fish. General effect, alewives are nature's way of exchanging nutrients between the marine and inland ecosystems. Nutrients come in, they get eaten. Nutrients go back out as alewives, and they get eaten in the ocean. They're a very important forage species for the marine fishery. Unharvested, in runs where there's no harvest, sometimes 1,000, 2,000 adults come back into a lake. In a harvested run, typically it's more like 100 per acre. On Weber, which includes 3 Mile, it's 24,000 acres. 1,200 and 1,200, 2,400 acres. And so it's a little bit over 200,000 typically that come in after the harvest. The exact role that escapement, as it's called, God knows why, but the number of spawning adults that enter a lake is called escapement. There's no known instance of too many spawning adults creating an observable nutrient imbalance. It's something of a mystery as to what the exact consequence of different numbers of fish coming back to spawn year by year. In the fall, after the alewives have spawned, the adults quickly head back to the ocean. Then large numbers of little juveniles start to grow, first as fry, and then eventually they get to be about a 6-inch minnow before they start to egress in the fall and go back to the ocean. It's a pile of biomass, tons and tons. You can stand out at the Weber Dam and see a football field-sized school of juvenile alewives. As they grow, they sequester phosphorus and other nutrients, particularly in the late fall, where there's often an algae bloom. And in the time before the alewives, the algae blooms on Weber were much worse. The measurements of surface phosphorus, the fertilizer for an algae bloom, in the mid-40s, once even almost 50 parts per billion. After the alewives, it quickly went down into the mid-20s. And you could see the effect. The blooms weren't anywhere nearly as severe. However, to get the water completely clear, you'd need to get it down to 15, even a little below that. So there's still a pretty good algae bloom. The alewives have helped with that, but they were hardly a total solution or a panacea. They have, however, clearly improved the fishing. Here's a photo of some juvenile alewives, just perfect forage for bass, for large panfish, for pickerel, practically any fish that swims can enjoy eating an alewife. Here is a photo from a club tournament on Sebasticook, which also has alewives. Those are nice fish. Those are healthy fish. And the person holding them, who's a former employee of the Department of Marine Resources, collected $50 as a pool for catching those fish. Now about the restoration in Vassalboro. The Weber Pond fish ladder was built the winter of 2008. The then president of China Region Lakes Alliance noticed that Weber had cleared substantially and initiated a project to open up 3 Mile Pond. And a miracle of God, the same thing happened on 3 Mile. Substantial improvement, but by no stretch of the imagination, a complete solution to the problem of algae blooms. That led, again through CRLA, China Regional Lakes Alliance, to forming ARI, Alewife Restoration Initiative. That was in 2016, and a much more ambitious project to restore alewives to China Lake. 6 dams, 4 different dam owners, and very, very expensive projects. We haven't had a project go over $1 million, but we've had several. We've had 2 of the fish ladders get up into that general realm. Here we are clearing Seaward Mill Stream, which is the outlet to 3 Mile Pond, which connects to Weber. And it was just volunteers pulling stuff out of the stream to clear it up. The person in front in the white baseball cap and a blue sweatshirt is Jim Hart, who is the president, or was the president at the time of China Region Lakes Alliance. Here's another part of that project, the China Region Lakes Alliance Youth Conservation Corps, and they're building a rock ramp at the box culvert on the Whitehorse Road. Very good project. Now we'll take a look at the Massey Dam. I mean, just an absolute poster child for a derelict dam that created a small pond in back of it. Well, there's no public access, no public recreation. The landowners were none too pleased at the removal of the dam, but there's just no possibility of rehabilitation. And this is an excavator with a battering ram, and stuff like this requires permitting. It's not cheap. It's really expensive to get in heavy equipment and skilled operators. But finally, here's what it looks like. And come to find out, that old mill building was quite beautiful once it was opened up and restored a little. Now here's the Lombard Dam, and a very similar kind of thing. Lots of heavy equipment, lots of expense. Here's what the Lombard Dam looked like after it was opened up. And still the old edifice of the dam and the dam control house, that was well worth preserving. It's very attractive. I am surprised at how attractive some of these sites are after the head pond is removed. And let's look a little bit further into that head pond. This is the remnants of an old log and crib dam that practically probably goes back into the 1800s. It's really, really old. And so there have been dams on that stream almost since the original settlement. Here's the Lad Dam. And here on River Right is the fish ladder. I'm kidding around. This is a design of fish ladder. It's not a steep pass. It's called a deniel, named after, God help me, a Belgian biologist in the 1800s named Gustav Deniel, who designed this kind of fish ladder, and it's still built today. And here's the outlet to it. And this year will be the first year that it's used, and everybody is looking forward to it. Next, the highly engineered Box Mills Dam ladder. And this has something that is a little new and unique in the world of fish ladders. It's got a public viewing area, and it's designed for public access and public observation. It's also got very complicated engineering. Here's the top of the dam, or the top of the fish ladder, I should say. And what the waterfall there is not a natural waterfall. It's an old stone dam. And of course, we contemplated simply removing it, but it was quickly discovered that if that dam was removed, the current would back cut the stream and take out the bridge behind it. And so we said, thank you very much. We'll keep that dam in place. And you can see, I'm going to point to it, they had to put in extra cement reinforcement to protect the old dam. Here is the owner of both the Box Mills Dam and the Lad dams. Many of you probably know Ray Breton, and Ray has played an absolutely critical role in those two projects, and a very helpful, useful role. He helped make good decisions on any number of different things. One of the most comical of which is that he insisted that the Box Mills Dam be set up so that wedding parties could get photographed in front of it after the wedding ceremony. And we think there's going to be a fair amount of interest in that. Here's the proverbial team. To the right in the orange hat is Nate Gray. Next to him is Brandon Kulik from the Sebasticook Lake Association, from the Sebasticook Land Trust, who's played a helpful role in this. Then we have Matt Streeter, who is the project manager, and in the blue coat, Landis Hudson, who is the executive director of Maine Rivers and the general manager of this project. And the last person is another representative of the Sebasticook Lake Association. But unfortunately, I didn't write his name down. Okay, to wrap things up, that's the background on the extensive fish passage restoration activity that has led to Vassalboro becoming the epicenter of alewife restoration in central Maine. It's 3 lakes, good experiences early. And I didn't put this in the slides, but a lot of the restoration activity has come from within the community, come from CRLA, come from the Weber Pond Association, come from the China Lake Association. I don't think it would be possible for somebody to come in from the outside and do this on their own. Maine Rivers has been a pleasant surprise. We'd read about them, but they proved to be an exceptionally capable partner in getting this up and running. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to do it without them. You need professionals to raise the money and to oversee those expensive projects. And last but not least has been the support of the Vassalboro Selectmen and the Vassalboro Town Manager, Mary Savins. Here's a picture of them. Lachlan Titus is in the center, and he went off after spending maybe 30 years off and on the Board of Selectmen, and he's been given a little plaque of appreciation. But he was very helpful to us in the process of raising money, getting engineering studies, and actually building the dams. That's the wrap up. Now it's time for questions and discussions. I have no idea how this went. From my perspective, I'm talking to a computer screen. I know there's people out there, and normally you get to interact a little bit as you're doing your show. And I don't know how this has gone, but if there are questions or comments that people want to make, now is the time to do that.
Frank, can you hear me?
No, I can't hear you.
This is Jim.
Sorry, Jim, you're coming in with some feedback.
I'm sorry. How is it now?
I'm still hearing feedback.
Okay, I'll ask Frank personally next time I see him.
Okay, maybe you could put your question in the chat, if you can do that.
I'll do that right now.
Okay, did
Is there a
anybody
way
else
to
have,
simply turn the volume up?
well, did anybody, give me 1 second there, Frank. I'll come right over to you.
Anybody else questions?
Okay.
Okay, well, here comes Jim's question here. So
Are there any studies on the optimum number of alewives per lake? Somebody did do a PhD on this subject, and it's a model based on the literature. And it's a logical model, but the literature doesn't convey a lot of direct measurements. For I have seen calculations done for, I think, 3 of the area lakes. And it usually comes out at 120 spawning adults per acre, so something in that general ballpark.
okay, anybody else with any questions?
Okay,
She's unmuted.
Frank, I think you were very informative. I thank you for that. And my question is a practical one. How is it determined who can collect the alewives to harvest them and who gets the money from the harvest? Does part of that come to the town, as was said when they were selling the idea of doing this?
Yes, that's correct. This is a state law, and I'm fairly sure, almost positive, that it's a 2/3 split to the harvester and a 1/3 split to the town. And in Vassalboro, typically that's about $20,000 a year.
So as this is being harvested, are there limits imposed on how much each person who's licensed or whatever they do are allowed to take from the lakes or from the fish ladders?
No, there aren't. There's a contract between the town and the harvester. And the harvester that has the contract has, in almost all cases, exclusive harvesting rights. But there is no specific limit on how much that harvester can take. They are limited to 4 days of harvest a week with 3 days of count. And so there is a limit on the time that they can harvest, but no specific limit on the number or weight of fish that they can take.
Which would seem to indicate that they're so plentiful, that's just not needed.
Yes, I have never seen an authoritative source on that question, but I think that's true.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else with questions? Okay.
I've heard that, now you mentioned that the whole issue has been controversial. What has made it controversial?
Is your question?
Yes, I mean, you mentioned that it has been controversial. Why?
That is the political equivalent of a soap opera. Let us go back to the mid 1990s when a fish ladder on the Canadian border near Calais was opened for the first time. And unfortunately, at the same time, the bass population in one of the headwater lakes reportedly collapsed. And I will stipulate that I believe that happened. There's no data, but I just think that was an accurate observation. And those little alewives were the wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they got blamed for it. Specifically, the regional biologists for inland fisheries and wildlife blamed the alewives for the collapse. And that was the narrative that got there first. I testified at several legislative hearings to restore alewives to the St. Croix River. Now that's the boundary between Maine and New Brunswick. And on one of them, it was held at the Civic Center. The room was packed, and there were 2 police officers there for security. I mean, it was just amazing how controversial it was.
So what has made it become less
That debacle on the St. Croix has never been replicated. There's been alewife restorations on probably a dozen lakes in Maine now. And there's never been anything like that happen. And what that suggests to me, there's been no replication of that St. Croix experience. And so that suggests to me that it was something different than the alewives. And additionally, after a while, after maybe 15 years, alewives were again restored to the St. Croix. And there's nothing like that that's happened on the St. Croix this time around. So I would say the positive experiences on other lakes and the economic effect of the growing lobster bait industry and the marine fishery obviously benefiting from the additional forage of restoring the alewife run. That's all toned down the controversy, but still, ideas like that die hard. It still crops up from time to time.
Are there still a lot of lakes that or dams that either need to be removed or need fish ladders?
Yes, there are.
So is the process going to continue little by little?
That's my prediction.
Yeah. Is it up to the towns to decide?
No, it's really under the jurisdiction of the Department of Marine Resources. As you may realize, there are thousands and thousands of lakes in Maine, and a relative handful of staff at the state agencies for natural resources. DMR does not have the capability of doing the job very quickly, doing every lake within a 5 to 10 year time frame. And their strategy, what I would assert is a reasonable strategy, is to try to do one drainage, one lake at a time. And pretty much that's happening. Every year or so, some new lake does come online, so to speak, with respect to a restoration.
Fascinating.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? You could put it in the chat. But I don't see any hands raised. Okay. Laura, do you just want to say something quick and I will get.
I'm really excited. This is a wonderful first presentation. Thank you so much, Frank, and everyone for coming.
Well, thank you, Jim, for coming. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Like I said, we'll have some more presentations later this week. We have Rebecca Ray on Wednesday at 6 p.m., followed by Barbara Brenessel, who's the author of the Alewives tale, and she'll be here on Friday as well at 6 p.m. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's been a great first presentation. And I thank you, Frank Richards, for being available and helping us with this project. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night. Good.